Good morning, everyone, and welcome you to your Amazon Cloud webinar today. The agenda for today's session is going to be, we'll be covering what is cloud computing, followed by the different service models which are available within cloud computing. And then we'll also discuss about the deployment model that you can choose in case if you want to move your workload over to the cloud, what are the strategies that you should adopt and what are the different deployment models that you can go ahead with. And then we'll talk about what is AWS. We'll give you an introduction of AWS Cloud and why it is the #1 infrastructure as a service cloud in the market. Then followed by the service models which are available within AWS Cloud and what are the deployment models that you can choose in AWS as well. Then last, we have planned a quick demo for you guys as well, in which we'll launch an Elastic Beanstalk application and we'll show you how those, how your application interact with your database. So primarily the agenda of this particular demo is to show you that how various components interact with each other and how you can create your own private environment within AWS and make it more secure. So we'll deploy two different application environment. So one, we will try to connect with the RDS instance or the database instance which is in the same environment, and the second application will try and deploy it in a separate VPC and see whether it connects or not. So primarily just to show you the security options which are available in AWS to to deploy your applications. Then lastly, we'll talk about the use cases as well. What are the different use cases that you can adopt and how you can move. So what is cloud computing? So we have heard this term quite a number of times. So primarily it is the use of servers which are deployed not in your local data center, but primarily it is deployed in some other data centers. We can also call them as remote servers, and you can connect to those data center environment or you can connect to those servers using internet. So it is a use of remote servers on the internet to store, manage and process your data rather than a local server or your personal computer. So the servers that you're going to deploy in the remote data center or the cloud environment, you can use it for any purpose which is feasible for you. So either you're using it for storing some business critical information, or you want to manage some of the processes in the cloud environment, or you want to process some business critical data or test or development data in the cloud rather than keeping it local within your data center or your personal computer. So whenever you are not keeping everything local and you are storing or managing or keeping your data outside of your local data center, so that term can be used as cloud computing. Of course, there are different variables within cloud computing as well. So in case if some private company is hosting your infrastructure in their particular data center, so that will fall under private cloud. In case if you are deploying it in your public data center, so public means the companies who are hosting data from multiple companies and they are keeping it, you can access this data over the internet, so that will become your public clouds. So what are the different service models which are available within cloud computing? So primarily there are three different variants which are available in cloud computing. They are infrastructure as a service, they are platform as a service, and software as a service. So these three models are the prevalent in the market. Of course, if you will research a little bit more on these topics, you will find out that most of the cloud companies they are also coming up with their own versions or their own iterations of as a service model. So anything which is not infrastructure, which is not platform, which is not software, we normally term it as X as a service. So depending upon what service those providers are trying to create. Primarily, there are three different types of models which are available, which is infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. In infrastructure as a service, any computing provider or cloud computing provider who is providing you this service, they will provide you virtualized compute resources over the internet. So all those computing resources or servers or instances will be deployed in their data center. And of course, you can choose to have your own physical servers as well. But most importantly, the reason why you're going to the cloud is to cut down the cost. And in that case, you will normally be using virtual machines or virtual server instances. So they will provide you virtual compute resources over the internet, and you do not need to worry about any of the underlying physical machines because you have been provided virtual machine as a service in this case, or compute instance as a service. You do not need to worry about what the underlying physical host is doing, how it is connecting, whether it has the required capacity or not. Basically abstracts the users from the physical machine. So all you have is a virtual machine. You will always treat that virtual machine as your physical machine, and you will deploy your resources on that VM instance as if it is a physical machine lying in your local data center. The only thing which is changing is rather than connecting it locally, you are connecting it remotely over the internet using different utilities that we have like RDP, SSH, or for that matter some third-party tools as well. When it comes to platform as a service, it will give you a runtime environment. So let me go back on infrastructure as a service. Primarily in infrastructure as a service. So what is infrastructure? Your compute, your storage, your networking, your databases. All of these are abstract resources that you can combine and create your own application environment. So for example, you can pick and choose whether you want to deploy a very simple example, whether you want to deploy a WordPress website on a single instance, or you want to deploy a highly available, scalable, and secure WordPress website. In that case, you can choose different tiers. So you will have your web tier where your web servers are sitting, and then you will have your database tier where you will be deploying your separate databases. So you're separating your database from your server instances. So depending upon the environment that you want to use, that depending upon the budget that you have, and depending upon how critical that application or your website is, you can pick and choose what services you want, and you can create your own architecture using infrastructure as a service model. So it gives you complete freedom in terms of what resources you can pick, what resources you can use, and how you want to design your application. But when we talk about platform as a service, in platform as a service, you do not have any control over the underlying architecture. Of course, you will have control of the resources that are going that will be deployed under platform as a service, but the architecture will always be same. Platform as a service model is primarily targeted for developer community. So for example, if any developer who want to deploy a PHP application, or for that matter Node.js application or Java application and so on, every time they have to go through the same step, that they will create a web server, they will deploy PHP, they will deploy MySQL server, they will deploy your PHP runtime environment, they will deploy your Apache web servers and so on. So all these things are repetitive in nature, and for each and every PHP environment you would need these things again and again. So what these cloud computing providers are doing, so that they are giving you this environment as a service. So we can call it as platform as a service. So you have a PHP platform, you have a Java platform, you have a Node.js platform, and so on. So the moment you select that I want to deploy the Node.js application or a PHP application, the underlying architecture will automatically be selected for you. All you have to do is upload your application code, and then the underlying architecture in terms of for example your web servers, your database servers, your security groups, your VPC, etc., everything will be deployed automatically by these providers. So it helps you in increasing your developer productivity, and it helps you in achieving in go-to-market scenario where you want to deploy your application and you want to make them live very quickly. The cloud providers in this case gives the ability to the customer to deploy your applications using programming languages or tools that are provided by the cloud provider. So you cannot change the underlying architecture. That's the key word which is associated with platform as a service, that every time you will deploy this application, every time you will get the same architecture. You cannot change the architecture. Whereas if we talk about software as a service, it goes even a step ahead. Your cloud provider in this case will also deploy the application onto their environment. So apart from the infrastructure, including your compute, your networking, security, databases, etc., they will also deploy the runtime environment, which is usually associated with platform as a service. So in terms of creating a web servers, creating a deploying your Apache, PHP, etc. And then on top of it, they're also deploying their application. So the perfect example I can give for software as a service is, for example, Salesforce.com. They have their own cloud, and they are providing their CRM application directly from their cloud environment. The drawback is that you do not have any control on any of the architecture of application, any architecture on the infrastructure, or any architecture of your platform as well. You are getting that software as a service, and in fact the data, which is your data, is also be stored in the cloud provider. So your cloud provider will be responsible for managing your data. So your data is not going to stay locally in your environment. That data will also be stored in the software as a service cloud provider. Examples of apart from Salesforce, other examples that I can think of is, so you have, for example, Microsoft Exchange as a service now. You have Office 365, where all of your office tools are being run in the cloud environment, and everything that you are doing on in your emails, etc., they are all stored in the Microsoft Cloud itself. Then moving on, we also have, so apart from the services model, so again, just to recap, we have three types of service model: infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and software as a service. Now moving on, we have three types of deployment models. We have public cloud, private cloud, and hybrid cloud. A service provider will always make the resources such as application storage, networking, etc., available to the general public over the internet. It is very easy and inexpensive setup because any underlying infrastructure like hardware, application, bandwidth, etc., they will be covered by the provider, and there will be no wasted resources because normally you will pay for what you use. So that's your public cloud. Primarily, you will deploy your environment in public cloud because you want to save your cost and you want to bring your IT budget lower, right? So every public cloud provider, so we have multiple public cloud providers which are available. So AWS is the leader in that segment, followed closely by Microsoft Azure. Then we have Google Cloud, which is really coming up nicely. Apart from it, there are a lot of other players like Rackspace, Box. There is a cloud from VMware as well. So there are a lot of other entrants in the market, but primarily your public cloud is, whenever you talk about public cloud, primarily you will hear about three public clouds. They are AWS, Azure, and Google. Now, in this public cloud environment, as I said, any of your resources will be deployed on to your public cloud provider environment, and you will access those resources over the internet. Any cloud provider that we talk about, they will always, you will always have pay-as-you-go model for most of the services. There is no upfront cost associated with any of the resources. If you want to deploy a server instance, you can just go ahead and deploy the server instances, and then you can start paying in the monthly billing. Now, of course, there are some variations in terms of pricing as well. So, for example, your AWS cloud, they bill your server instances based on per hour usage. Then you have Microsoft Cloud that I think bill you on per minute usage. Then you have Google Cloud, which gives you sub-second billing as well. Everybody has their own variations of pricing, but the main focus here is that everybody is giving you an option to pay for what you use. And this applies to not only compute instances, this applies to primarily most of the services that they have. But whether we are talking about platform as a service, whether we are talking about your database instances, whether we are talking about storage, all this you will only pay for what you use. Whereas if we talk about private cloud, so what are the examples of private cloud? So companies like HCL, your companies like Wipro, companies like TCS, companies like IBM, companies like CSC, companies like Rackspace, Fujitsu, all of these companies, they also have their own data center as well, which they normally own and operate. Either they own those data center or they lease it from some third party, but they run that data center on their own. So in case if you want to deploy your infrastructure in their data centers, so that becomes, for you, it is still a cloud because you are not deploying it locally in your environment, but you are keeping it in some other data center environment. So that becomes a private cloud environment in this case. All the private cloud providers, they offer hosting services to only a limited number of people behind firewall. So it minimizes the security concerns. Private cloud, it also gives the enterprise or companies direct control of their data because you can manage or you can decide what architecture that you want. You can decide whether I want to keep it in one rack, whether I want to keep it in multiple racks. You can decide where exactly I want to deploy my environment. So you will only choose. So let's say that you are a company working in EMEA region and you want that my data center should only be deployed in, let's say, Frankfurt region. So you will only pick the private cloud companies who have data centers in Frankfurt region only. So you get to decide where you want to deploy. Compare it with public cloud providers. They normally have listed out their data center that we have data centers only in these locations. And apart from it, even if your requirement is to deploy it somewhere else, you do not get that option. Whereas in private cloud, you will select the company whose data center is probably where you want them to be. But keep in mind that with private cloud companies, cost is usually more than the public hosting cloud providers. They offer leasing services most of the time, but of course that leasing services comes at a premium. And in most cases, your private cloud companies, there is some kind of upfront cost associated with it. That upfront cost can be in terms of purchasing new equipments for you. That upfront cost can be in terms of transitioning your resources. That upfront cost can be setting up your internet connectivity or setting up your MPLS or IPsec connectivity and so on. And you will pay for each and every element that you're using. So that you may have to pay for the rack spaces, you may have to pay for the power cooling charges, etc. And you will also have to pay for the data that you want to deploy or migrate from your location to the private cloud environment as well. So in terms of pricing, definitely it comes a lot expensive, but it gives you the freedom to decide your own architecture. So you may want that, my web tier should have a separate firewall, your applications environment should have a separate firewall, and your database should have a separate firewall, as well as, IDS and IPS requirement. So you can pick and choose, or you can decide what architecture you want, and your cloud companies will oblige in terms of what architecture that you are looking for. The last environment that we want to discuss is the hybrid cloud environment. So as the name implies, so companies who are making use of both the cloud environments, you have your public cloud environment as well as your private cloud environment. If you are making use of both those environments, then it becomes a hybrid cloud. So this is a cloud computing environment which uses a mix of on-prem, private cloud, third party, or public cloud. So it is not just private cloud as well as public cloud. Even if you are keeping some, so typically any company that you talk to, the way they start off with public cloud is they do not move all their workload onto the public cloud immediately. They always start low and slow, and items which are non-critical in nature. So typically they will always start with moving their dev and test environment onto the public cloud. And once they get hand and feet dirty, and it's they're more familiar with public cloud environment and they're more confident on public cloud environment, then only slowly and gradually they start moving their business critical applications as well. Now, in terms of keeping your business critical application, you have multiple options. One, you can keep your business critical application within your own data center or within your own locations. We normally call it as on-prem locations or on-premises location. Or you can, you don't want to manage the data centers on your own, then you can use some private cloud companies, and you can host your business critical application in those environments. Or probably you're using some third-party leasing services where the data center is being leased by someone else, but you are managing the entire data center operations on your own. So all this, whenever we have mix of these environment, whenever we have mix of public as well as private or on-prem or third-party, we call it as a hybrid cloud environment. Why any company would want to go for hybrid environment? Because it gives you best of both worlds. By moving your dev and test environment on the public cloud environment, you are bringing your IT budgets low. It gives you more flexibility, it gives you more scalability, it increases your speed of go-to-market, since you can develop and test your applications very quickly on the public cloud environment. But by keeping your business critical applications or your production environment onto your on-prem versus or your private cloud environment, you're making sure that you are following the architecture that you want to follow, and you're keeping your environment more secure. So rather than connecting your production environment over internet, you are connecting to your private cloud environment using some more advanced security features like IPsec, VPN, and so on. However, all these features are now available on public cloud environment as well. You can extend your own connectivity to public cloud environment. You can have your own private connectivity to your cloud environment as well. But still, there are companies who are kind of cynical about security, and they don't want to deploy their environment on public cloud providers. So they can follow the model of hybrid cloud model, which is giving them the benefit of price reduction and everything for their dev and test environment, whereas still keeping the security environment in their private cloud environment. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what is AWS. So AWS is a secure cloud service platform offering compute, database, storage, content delivery, and other functionalities, which helps to keep your business, which helps in businesses to scale and grow. So this is a public cloud provider that we are talking about. But as I said, that most of the cloud providers, they also have all the features which are closely aligned with your private cloud as well. So let's take a look at what AWS is and what are the different service models and deployment models that you can adopt in AWS as well. In terms of service model, so typically you can use your AWS service cloud either as a public cloud or as a hybrid cloud as well. So public cloud, when you are deploying all your environment, your dev and test environment on on AWS, so this becomes your public cloud. In case if you're keeping your business critical applications on-prem and you're using your dev and test environment on AWS, so then you're following the model of hybrid cloud. Of course, AWS is not a private cloud. It cannot be a private cloud. You cannot decide where you want to deploy your infrastructure. I mean, of course, there are regions, availability zones available for you to choose, but still the architecture, or you do not have underlying excess of the architecture that you can do. So there are some designs limitations in terms of what you can or what you cannot do on AWS. So it is not your private cloud environment. In terms of deployment models, primarily, so this is one area where there is a lot of confusion, and students do get confused on whether AWS is an infrastructure as a service model, platform as a service model, or a software as a service model. Whenever you look at the Gartner report for cloud companies, the Gartner report always say that your AWS is a infrastructure as a service model. Why? Pretty simple, that you can go into AWS console, you can pick which resources you want. Maybe you want to deploy it on one server instance, or maybe you want to deploy multiple server instances, maybe you want to deploy a database instance, and so on. So you can pick and choose the environment or the infrastructure variables that you want. So this fits the category of infrastructure as a service model. Whereas there are some services which are available within AWS, and in fact we have planned our demo today for that as well, which fits the category or the definition of platform as a service as well. So for example, there is a service called Elastic Beanstalk, where you can just go and select the runtime environment that you're looking for. So maybe you want to deploy a Java application, PHP application, Docker, Go, Python, etc. So you can select the runtime environment. It will automatically select the underlying architecture for those environments. All you have to do is upload your PHP or your Java or your Go or your Python applications, and it will automatically deploy the underlying environment or underlying architecture. So this fits the definition and category of platform as a service model as well. Thirdly, software as a service model says that you can all your application, even your application will be deployed in the cloud, and you will just get your application as a service. There are numerous companies which are available in the market who are deploying their software on AWS, and they are offering that software as a service to their end customer, right? So example that I can give you is, for example, there is a service called Microsoft Workspace in AWS. So Workspace is nothing but your dynamic desktop in the cloud. Now all your data will be stored in the cloud. Each and every client who opts for this service, they will get the same look and feel of that application. In this case, the application we are talking about is a dynamic desktop. Similarly, you can have your other applications. So for example, you can deploy your, let's say, Exchange in the cloud, or your Active Directory in the cloud. So all these things will come under the category of software as a service model. So your AWS model can be equivalent to an infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, as well as software as a service model. But if we look at the report, or if we look at the Gartner report, typically your AWS is infrastructure as a service model, but there are some services which will fit into the category or definition of platform as a service and software as a service as well. So keep in mind going forward, whenever someone says that AWS is only infrastructure as a service model, so you can give those definitions or examples of the services that can fit into the category of PaaS and SaaS as well. All right, so AWS is an infrastructure as a service because it provides infrastructure in the form of its AWS services. So things like EC2, RDS, VPC, S3, EBS, and so on. So all this is infrastructure as a service. Platform as a service, so I gave you an example of Elastic Beanstalk. So again, with Beanstalk, you can focus on the deployment part or the development part of your application. All you have to do is select the runtime environment, and then you upload your code, and everything underlying will be deployed by the Elastic Beanstalk itself. So this fits a category and definition of platform as a service. So as I said, AWS is not a software as a service in itself, but there is a marketplace in AWS where you can discover and subscribe to dozens. In fact, there are thousands of applications which are available on AWS marketplace. So typically those applications will be in the form of AMI. Okay, so this brings to our demo part, that how do different services interact in the Amazon cloud. So in AWS, you can use various services which work together to form an application. But how do those services interact with each other? So typically you will always create a VPC in your AWS cloud environment. So using that VPC, you can control which particular instances that you are going to deploy in that VPC will have access to the internet or which can be accessed from the internet, which instances will be able to talk to each other, and how you can isolate your resources from the rest of your AWS. So the demo that we are going to show you is we will be deploying a very simple PHP application which will connect to a database instance. In this case, we'll be using an RDS instance for this. And what we'll do is initially we will deploy our database instance. We'll deploy our RDS instance in one VPC. Then we'll create that Elastic Beanstalk application in same VPC and see whether they connect to each other. And then we'll create another Elastic Beanstalk application, this time deploying it in a separate VPC, and then we'll see whether it can connect to that RDS instance or not. So we are trying to show you that when you create a VPC or when you create separate VPCs, the resources within those VPCs do not talk to each other by default. Of course, you can make them talk to each other, but for that you will have to open some security configuration so that they can talk to each other. But the very definition of VPC is that it offers you segmentation within your public cloud. So you can create your own private environment within the public cloud, and those environments will be isolated from each other. All right, so let's go for a quick demo. In interest of time, what I've done is I have already deployed this MySQL database instance. So just to show you the steps that we have done, so all you will have to do is click on launch a database instance. Select the MySQL database instance. Make sure you stay with the free tier account. Click on select. And just for testing purpose, so we are going to do it at dev and test. The only difference between dev and production environment is that this gives you option of multi-AZ deployment. You can use that multi-AZ deployment feature over here as well. But dev and test environment you can primarily be using for single instance. Then you'll select the general public license, which database version that you want to choose. Select the instance class. So T2 micro is the one which is covered under free tier micro. If I choose anyone else, even for example T2 small, so it will give me this this small little warning box which will say that this is not covered under free tier. So if you want to stay within free tier, you need to select T2 micro. This is the feature that I was talking about, the only feature which differentiates whether you want to deploy in production or whether you want to deploy in dev and test. If you select on yes, so it will deploy two database instances, one in each availability zone. If primary database instance goes down, it will automatically switch to the secondary database instance. So this is primarily your high availability requirement. So we're going to say no. Storage type. So there are multiple storage types available. You have general purpose SSD, provisioned IOPS, and magnetic. Magnetic is the cheapest one, but it gives you very low IO. Your general purpose gives you 3 IOPS per GB. So and you can burst up to 10,000 IOPS in general purpose SSD. In case if you want more than 10,000 IOPS, then in that case you will have to select the provisioned IOPS. For provisioned IOPS, you will have to go for minimum 100 GB storage. If I select 50 GB, it will give me an error that I need to select minimum 100 GB. So I will stick to the general purpose one. Select maybe 5 or 8 GB since it's just for testing purposes. Then you will have to configure your database instance. So this is the name of your database instance, then your username, your password, and so on. So typically if you deploy it, it normally will take anywhere between 7 to 10 minutes to deploy that RDS instance. So in interest of time, I have already deployed it. So we'll show you that instance that we have deployed. So this is the database instance that we have deployed. So as you can see, we are using T2 micro SSD 5 GB, and then this is the name of the database instance. This is the username. Then we have the password. We have configured a security group. So quickly show you the security group as well. In this particular security group, we have enabled SSH traffic and your MySQL Aurora traffic. I have only enabled this MySQL traffic from my IP so that I can access this database instance. And secondly, I have allowed it from WebDMZ security group. So there is another security group that we have configured, WebDMZ, which is primarily taking all your traffic from the internet on port number 80 and 443. So what we are trying to do over here is that we are launching our web server. So in this case, our web servers will be launched by the Elastic Beanstalk application. but that web service will take traffic from the internet, and we are allowing your database traffic only from that particular security group which has your web servers. All right, so this is already done, it is available. Now let me go to Elastic Beanstalk. So you can click on services and go to Elastic Beanstalk. Make sure that you are in the same region. So I'm in North Virginia region. Again, in interest of time, I have already deployed both the application, but just to show you the step, you can click on create a new application, uh, type new whatever name that you want to give, click on create, and then you will have to create the environment. In this case, select the web server environment. Here you will have to select. So I have the application. Let me show you the PHP application that I'm going to deploy. So this is the PHP application that I have. It's a very simple PHP application. We have a form which is taking some kind of input, and that input will be stored in the database. We have the username. So this is the our RDS instance DNS name. So this is the RDS instance DNS name or the endpoint where we want to connect. Then you have the username, password, and the database name. Then we have a table within this database name which is called image. Okay, and the connection string is saying that if you connect, then it will show you this form where you can enter anything and it will directly be deployed or directly be stored into the database table. If you are not able to connect, it will die saying that unable to connect to the database. Okay, so again, just to show you the steps, you select the PHP application. This is the environment that we are going to select. You select upload your code and click on upload, and then select the index.php. Make sure whenever you are uploading any application on Elastic Beanstalk, you upload a zip file of it. So this is the zip file that I want to upload. Okay, click upload, and then you can go into configure more options, and this is where you can select which instance I want to use. So maybe you want to use the T2 micro, which is covered under free tier. Okay, maybe you want to change the security groups, or you want to change the VPC. So by default, if you do not select this VPC, it will automatically deploy in the default VPC. I have created two VPC. So one is the default VPC. I have created another VPC, which is a new VPC. You can select which particular availability zone your instances will be deployed, and you can select the security group on these VPCs as well. So I have already done that because it will take around 7 to 10 minutes to deploy an Elastic Beanstalk application as well. So the first environment that I have selected, in that environment I'm selected the main VPC or the default VPC, and in that I have launched my Elastic Beanstalk application in a web DMZ. Okay, once you do that in your databases, so we are not going to select anything because our PHP application is automatically connecting to the database. So let's click on cancel here, and let's go back to the previous environment. So this is your first environment. Okay, if you want to see the configuration, you will see it is a single instance, T2 micro instance. Then you have your VPC environment in which I am using the main VPC, and I have selected all the subnets. So in case if I want to deploy in any of those subnets. Okay, and lastly, in terms of database, I have not used any database because my PHP application is automatically connecting to the database. Now this application, as you can see, is already deployed. Okay, so once you click on that application, it will give you the URL. So you click on this URL, and it is this PHP application is asking for the form. So if I want to give the name, so maybe I want to add this record. First of all, let's see the database table. So for that, I'm using the utility called MySQL Workbench. With this utility, I can connect to the RDS database instance and see what are the tables inside it. So the database instance is test database instance that I have included in my PHP application. Within that, there is a table called image. If I run this query, select star from image, it is showing 3 rows as of now. I'm gonna add one more record in this. Let's see if this record is getting added. Let's run this query. It is running this query on the database. And as you can see, it has added some more records as well. So I may have added some more records in the past, so it is showing you 6 rows as of now. If you run it one more time, you will see the number of records are 6. Let me add one more. So this is demo lab, and it will add another records to the rows as well. Okay, so this is working. Now let me close this particular one. Then I have deployed another application, which is my Beanstalk 2. Now what I did in this application is, rather than keeping it in the same VPC, this time I have deployed it in a separate VPC. So if you see in the VPC section, I have deployed two VPC. One is the custom VPC, or sorry, the default VPC, and one is the new VPC that I have deployed for testing purpose. In this particular application, as you can see, I have only selected two subnets, okay, so that my application will be deployed in this. I'm using a T1 micro in this. I should have used a T2 micro to stay within free tier. Okay, now if I select this particular environment, let's see if I'm able to connect to the database instance or not. Because my security group that I have configured for my RDS or database instance, that security group is only allowing traffic from the security group of my previous VPC that I have configured, or the default VPC. That's why it was allowing connection from the previous Elastic Beanstalk application. But since now it is taking connection from the outside of this VPC, which is not covered under this security group, it will not allow it to connect. So as you can see, it is still not connecting. It will try for some time, and after that it will display the message that unable to connect to that particular database. Okay, so it will try a couple of times, and after some time it will show you display the message unable to connect to the database, please try again later. So that's our PHP application, the way we have configured it. All right, let's wait for a moment. In the meantime, if there are any more questions from anyone, we can take. All right, so let's continue with our slides. And as you can see, it has already shown you unable to connect to the database. Please try again later. So it will not allow you to connect. So this is where your security is coming into picture when you deploy your resources in separate VPCs. By default, they will not allow you to connect the instances or connect the resources to each other. Okay, so primarily the use case for the VPC is to segment your infrastructure or segment your environment within the public cloud. It is used as primarily for making sure that you are, keeping your environment secure. The second use for the VPC is in case if you want to extend your current data center environment to the cloud in terms of what IP addresses that you're using. If you want to follow the same IP schema in your cloud environment as well, then you can create your custom VPC and you can use the same IP address schema that you're using in your private environment, and you can continue to use the private IP addresses to talk to your instances or your resources which are sitting in AWS. Of course, for that you need to have some kind of private connectivity between your data center environment and AWS environment as well. So you can use direct connect and use MPLS or lease line or IPsec connectivity to talk to those instances as well. All right, so let's do a quick recap of our session. So what we did, so first of all, we started off with a definition of what is cloud computing. So primarily, the very definition of cloud computing is when you are deploying your servers or your storage or your resources outside of your local environment, then you are using the cloud computing services. Initially, we used to call it as a hosting environment, but now it is called cloud computing environment. In terms of service models, so there are three types of service models, which is infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, and SaaS, software as a service. We called it as IaaS, PaaS, and SaaS. In infrastructure as a service, you can pick and choose the infrastructure and you can create your own architecture that you want. In platform as a service, primarily the underlying architecture is predefined or pre-populated for you. You can just go ahead and deploy your application. Even the underlying runtime environment in terms of whether you need an Apache server, PHP, or any dependencies for that matter are already taken care by you. Primarily targeted for developer community who can just go ahead and deploy and develop their applications on Elastic Beanstalk. Software as a service, when even the software that you want to deploy is already pre-deployed on your compute instances or on your cloud computing. The example that I gave you was Salesforce.com, who has their own, software as a service cloud in which they give you CRM, their CRM application as a service. In terms of deployment model, there are three types of deployment model: public, private, and hosted. Public, in case if you are going out with the famous cloud providers like AWS, Google, Azure, and so on. Private, when you're using either some of the big companies like this TCS, Wipro, IBM, Dell, HP, CSC, etc., or when you are using some other hosting companies to deploy your infrastructure. For that matter, you can also have your own on-prem environment as well. That is also be considered as a private cloud. And the third deployment model is hybrid cloud. When you are using a combination of public as well as private cloud, that's called a hybrid cloud environment. Most of the companies will always have hybrid cloud environment with business critical applications running in private cloud and the dev and test environment or non-critical applications running in public cloud. In terms of service model for AWS, so I gave you a definition that AWS is mainly an infrastructure as a service model, but there are some applications or there are some services which fits into the category and definition of PaaS and SaaS as well. So you can argue whether it's not purely an infrastructure as a service model. There are some services which can also fall under PaaS and SaaS model as well. In terms of deployment model, again, it is not a private cloud environment. You can either use it as a public cloud deployment model where you're keeping everything on AWS, or you can use a hybrid model where you're keeping business critical applications on your on-prem environment and extending your dev and test or non-critical environment to AWS as well. In terms of use cases, so we have shown a quick demo by deploying Elastic Beanstalk application in one VPC and keeping our RDS instance in the same VPC. We showed you that it was, this application was working and was able to connect to the RDS database instance. But the moment I deploy that application in a separate VPC, I was not able to connect. Reason being, by default, your VPC will not allow connectivity between each other. If you want to enable connectivity, there are some additional features that you want to implement. Maybe you want to implement VPC pairing, or maybe you want to open your security group in such a way that they should be able to connect through the internet as well. All right, so thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have enjoyed your demo. And make sure that you check out Adureka as well. We have a very nice courses lined up for you in case if you want to continue your journey in AWS Cloud. Thank you so much, and I'll see you sometime later.
I hope you enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply to them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to our Adureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!